Hello, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Today, we're going down a biological route. With us today, population geneticist based at the MPI, the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany, and also Leiden in the Netherlands, is Leonardo Arias Alvis. Welcome.
Thanks, Austin. So it's great to see you again.
Always a pleasure. So to kick things off, right? So we've had a few different guests on the podcast so far, right? We've had Rick van Geijn, who's a linguist. We had Nick Emlyn, geneticist, Sietse Noorder, who's a biogeographer. So now we're going and we're completing actually what I mentioned at the beginning, which is that we will have all of the guests from the first 4 episodes will be members of this Sapphire team. And we've introduced that in previous episodes. So, hey, if you haven't listened to those, go ahead and check them out. You work as a population geneticist for this project, but you didn't always start out you weren't always that. You didn't start out in this way, did you? So perhaps if you could tell us a bit about your academic background, what you studied as an undergraduate, and we can kind of work our way up towards the present.
Thanks for the introduction. I'm from Colombia, and I did my undergraduate studies in Colombia, in Cali, in the Universidad del Valle, and I study biology there. And I study biology because I was fascinated by the diversity of life, and I actually grew up in a town that is called Villavicencio, which is actually at the foothills of the Andes, and it's the transition of the Andes with the llanos, like the flatlands of Colombia. And that part where I grew up was so diverse. It was just like, it was green everywhere. It was just like birds everywhere.
Wow.
And I was just fascinated by life, and I think that's what led me to study biology. And then afterwards I did while studying biology, I found that genetics was what I wanted to do, and I went and studied genetics. Like my bachelor's work was like doing genetics, also of two indigenous communities from the region in the Amazon, and it's where my father used to travel a lot through the Amazon, and I was traveling with him sometimes, and then I encountered indigenous populations, and I was always fascinated by this contrast between the admixed, like the national population, and the indigenous groups. And I think that's what kind of set the path to study population genetics. And back then I studied with a geneticist, Guillermo Barrete, who studied with his master's with Francisco Salzano, who was a famous population geneticist from Brazil, and was one of the pioneers in South America in studying indigenous populations, and especially from the Amazon. And I heard all his expeditions to the Amazon, and he himself studied with James B. Neal, who was also famous for his studies of human genetics. And then I did my master's, like expanding a little bit of the groups that I was studying, and all the regions of the DNA of these populations, which is this molecule that contains or that codes all how life is basically kind of shape it. So the DNA contains all the information of how an organism is going to develop and what the traits are like the individuals are going to have, and these are inherited from our parents and grandparents and etc. So it just goes, this information is transmitted over generations, and that's what is important, the DNA for the study of human populations.
Fascinating.
And yeah, and then later on, so while I was doing my master, I started reading a lot of literature from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig. He was in the Department of Evolutionary Genetics was where the first Neanderthal genome was sequenced, but also Mark Stoneking and others there were studying many different populations across the world. And Bridget Pakendorf also established a group there trying to use population genetics and using also linguistic evidence to understand the history of different human populations. And when I start reading the literature coming from this institute, I say, oh, I want to go there, and I apply. So I first went for a short research stay, which was funded by the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service. And I went there for 3 months, and then I did some lab work and some analysis, and then Mark Stoneking told me, okay, I think you can apply for a PhD, and I did that, and I got a position. And yeah, and I started there as a PhD and finished my PhD. And during my PhD, I went to do fieldwork for 1 year in the Colombian Amazon.
So what does genetic fieldwork look like? Because we've had linguistic fieldwork and anthropological fieldwork kind of featured on the podcast previously, and biogeographical, of course. And I think, for each type of fieldwork, it can look very different, right? So how does it look for a geneticist?
Well, so for a geneticist, first we need to define who do we want to study. So what are the populations we want to study? And so normally a first hint that you have to define the populations are the ethnolinguistic groups. So normally when you see, okay, what is the diversity, like the linguistic diversity of an area, and then you see a map where there's, okay, here there are these people that belong to this ethnicity that normally speak this language. So on a field trip, you first start for defining what are the populations you want to study. And I started with a map of the linguistic diversity of Colombia, which was a very multicolor map. So it was just like so much diversity there, many different languages. And then I said, wow, I want to study all this diversity, so I have to go there. And so I basically went to many different places, many small towns, and tried to make contacts. I have some previous contacts from my master's and my bachelor's experience in the field. But yeah, so the Colombian Amazon is an area that is around 400,000 square kilometers. So it's bigger than Germany.
Yeah.
So, and so you don't have like autobahns everywhere that connects one place to another. So it's a very isolated area where rivers and small plains that you have to contract normally allow you to move from one place to the other. And that's what I did. I went to towns, and normally I went to some administrative offices in each town, and I asked, okay, is there any office dealing here with indigenous affairs? and I'm interested in understanding and in studying the human diversity in this area and the linguistic diversity, and so how all these groups are related, how these communities of people speaking different languages are related, what is the origin of this diversity, and when these people kind of migrated there and kind of established as different groups. And yeah, so of course, yeah, there's a challenge to kind of explain these and so tell people, okay, I'm interested in the story, like in studying the history of those groups. But many groups will say, okay, but we know our history. What are you going to tell us about our history? So
certainly. So
then,
that's a really interesting point, actually, if I may just focus on it for a bit, is yeah, because of course the type of history, we kind of use the same word a lot, like you know, the genetic history of a people, but you know, there's sort of different things going on here at the same time, right? There's the history, the narrative that the communities themselves construct, as we all do, you know, our narratives of our group's past, and the past of other peoples, right? The whole kind of historical cosmology on one level, and then there's you know, the types of questions that you want to ask, right, which are a bit different, of course. So how do you negotiate that? How do you say, well, yes, you know, your history, which is very valid, is, you know, as you say, is this. I also want to investigate, you know, this other thing. How do you bridge that with the communities?
Well, yeah, it's a challenging task, and it's a process of building trust, and so showing people that you have like a real and a trustful, or how do you say, a sincere goal to study, and you are interested in their history and who they are and how they came to be what they are nowadays. So I think when you study history and you are interested in these kind of studies, you have an advantage in comparison, for example, with other, you know, let's say the like physics, for example, because the interest in history and the interest in who we are is, I think, is a universal feature of human societies, and we see across the world that many human societies are interested in their history, and then they record this history in different ways, and as you say, they have cosmogonies. So and yeah, so we as scientists, we are also interested in understanding that, and we know that this history is very complex and has been shaped by many different factors, and they are aware of that. So because they have experienced many different events and situations in the past that have impacted you know, who they are and where they live. So yeah, so you have to go there and say, okay, so we know that the history is complex and is incomplete because we cannot go back to the past and kind of see who, like, what happened and where people live and why people move. So we just know from parts of this history that is encoded in, for example, for Western societies in books, and also for other societies around the world that coded, like, have some sort of writing that code their history. But in these societies, in the Native American societies, this was mainly based in oral traditions. Right. So they have all their histories encoded in stories about their origin, how they are related to who they marry, and so yeah, so there's in these stories normally you see a combination of like animal characters and pre-humans and humans, and but also like mountains and other features that are like all these features encode their history. And it's like when you think on Greek mythology, you think that Greek mythology is all about fantasies and like stories that people just invented out of but in those mythologies or cosmogonies, the history of these people is encoded. They use these different constructions to encode their history. And so yeah, so biology is another tool as studying cosmogonies or ancient books or languages. It's another tool to study their history, because we can study the DNA, and I already mentioned that this DNA is transmitted from generation to generation, from our parents, grandparents, etc. So by studying the DNA, we can gain some insights about this history.
Certainly, and, the record of sort of who was where and when, and sort of who had children with whom, etc. Right?
Yeah, exactly. And so yeah, so I normally what I will do is go first contact the leaders of each community, have a chat with them, explain the aims of our research and how this research can help us to understand more of this history. And afterwards I will go to a community and like have a meeting with many people where I will explain. Many of these communities are bilingual in Spanish, so I'm a native Spanish speaker, but in some cases we use local translators, so some assistants that we contract in the field to help us kind of translate. But you already see the difficulties first of communicating these complex ideas and then using someone to translate those complex ideas into their language and their
I think a lot of people think it's already hard enough to communicate about genetics in English or Spanish, where we have these long traditions of working with those vocabularies, and yet it's still difficult. So I can imagine it's quite hard to sort of really bridge deep cultural divides, and yet still communicate about genetics.
And then so once you explain that, so you first have to explain kind of what the DNA is, where the DNA is stored. So we normally say, okay, so we know that, so we have like we are the product of of a union between our parents. So our parents give birth to us, and we inherited many things from our parents. And and when you compare yourself with your parents or your grandparents, you see that there are some things in common. And when we compare ourselves with our siblings, we see that we are not exactly the same, but we share some features with them and with our parents and grandparents. So what I say is that oral body is made of these small blocks, and each of these blocks contain information on how these traits are transmitted. And so since and we can use that information that is stored in each of these blocks and to study their history. And I was, for example, like we normally collect saliva. And so people were like, oh, but like for some people were funny, like, why are you interested in my saliva? And so, the skin inside our mouth is one of the tissues that rechange one of the tissues that are changed faster in our body. So in their saliva, you have parts of those cells or these blocks, and from those blocks is where we extract the DNA in the laboratory and then study this DNA. And that's what normally, just going back to the initial point, is how the field work for population genetics is. I don't know if that's clear enough or if I just diverge too much.
Oh, I think so. I think we have a much clearer image of how you do it. I'm sure you could, of course, recount countless stories and examples about it as well. But yeah, I think that is clear. I think it is fascinating, of course, that we tend to think of, okay, here's culture on the one hand, and then, oh, they're the sciences and they cut across cultures. But actually, you have to really navigate culture as you talk about science. Not everyone understands it in the same way, of course, and it's something that's very interesting that you have to engage with as a field worker, I imagine. Yeah. Right. Okay. So this was all in the PhD phase. Correct me if I'm wrong. So this was still in Leipzig, in Germany, at the Max Planck Institute there. So when did you arrive in Leiden, and how did you become a part of this Sapphire project, which we've mentioned before?
Yeah. So I connected with Rick through a common colleague, and Rick wrote me back in 2017, I think, when I was finishing my PhD, and he was, oh, Leo, so look, I'm a linguist. I'm working in South America, and I'm studying indigenous languages in South America, and I'm interested in starting a project to study kind of the population history from South America using a multidisciplinary approach. And so I'm trying to assemble a team of researchers from different disciplines, so that we can together approach this question about the population history of the continent, and to explain why South America is so exceptional, as we have heard from previous episodes, why there is so much diversity, and how this diversity was shaped. So back then he was structuring the proposal, and he was planning to submit this proposal to the Dutch Science Foundation, the NWO, and he asked me, are you interested in working together on this project and contributing with the genetics part for the project? And I was, that sounds fantastic. It's actually what I'm interested in, but I'm using genetics, and if we can, and during my PhD, I was informed by the big body of literature, both from linguistics and archaeology and cultural anthropology, to make sense out of the genetic patterns that I was observing by studying many groups in the Colombian Amazonia, which is called the Northwestern Amazonian part. Mm-hmm. And so I say, yes, I'm interested. I would like to be part of this. But then, so the proposal did well, but in the last stage, it was rejected. So we say, okay, sorry, no one is interested in finding, or at least back then the Netherlands Science Foundation was not interested, or the committee that evaluated the proposal was like, okay, maybe that's not good enough. And some months later, Rick told me, okay, what if we try the ERC? Would you still be interested in doing this?
The European Research Council.
Yeah, the European Research Council. Yeah. And I say yes, and then we work on the proposal, like addressing some of the comments that the previous reviewers made on the proposal. And so Rick handled everything and put together the different pieces. And Nick Enlen was also part of this initial enterprise to put together this proposal. And yeah, so Rick kind of put everything together and submitted, and then I forgot about that. I was finishing my PhD. In the meantime, in 2018, my first son arrived, was born, and I was busy with finishing my PhD thesis, submitting papers to journals, and parenting, and trying to make a family. And
that sounds like quite a busy time. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. It was very busy. It was very busy year. And shortly after I defended my PhD thesis, I received an email from Rick saying, "Leo, we got funded by the ERC, and
Nice.
great." It's like cool. And I was like, great, that's great news. And so I had a scholarship from the Colombian government, and so I had the agreement that I have to go back to the country after I finished my PhD, and I did so. I defended my thesis and went back to Colombia, and I stayed there for 6 months trying to kind of arranging all the administrative details and finding a position there. I say, okay, maybe I can arrange something back in Colombia and collaborate with Rick from Colombia. However, that was not possible, and then I say, okay, then I'll go back to Europe with the family, and then I started. I joined officially the project in 2020, in May 2020, and so we start kind of. So Rick, of course, started early, so he moved to Leiden first and tried to set up everything, and so I joined, and then kind of the group start growing, and now we have a nice group of people working on this project.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more, having interviewed a few of them. Yeah, and it's fascinating. And so you also, I think what stood out in this narrative is really just how important this interdisciplinary approach was for you from the beginning. Even before joining this interdisciplinary project, you said, hey, this is already the kind of stuff I love doing, right? This is already the literature that informs my own work in this area, drawing from these others. And I thought that was really nice, because some interdisciplinary projects, they just kind of slap disciplines together, but what I like about this and your angle on it too is how just organically it comes together. It's really nice.
And it's just because so we're, as I said before, we are interested in the past, and as you go back in time, there are many things impacting and like shaping like whatever situation we have in the present. And so not like, if you focus on a single discipline, you're probably gonna have an incomplete picture of how the past was. Certainly. And so normally those records are incomplete. If you, for example, focus on archaeology, some materials preserved better than others, so you have kind of an incomplete record. And as the same with the genes. It's not the studying the genes of human populations gives the complete picture. It's just adding another piece to reconstruct this puzzle, this complex past that is human history.
Maybe one thing we could highlight, because I know this is a big part of the Sapphire project and also of your work in particular as well, are these so-called linguistic genetic mismatches. So I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about these. What is a linguistic genetic mismatch?
So yeah, when we talk about a mismatch, what we refer is when like languages have genealogical relationships with other languages, and they form what they're so-called language families, with the exception, of course, of language isolates, which are those groups for which they don't have a sister language alive, or we are not able to reconstruct any genealogical relationship with these isolates, either because their sister languages die out, or yeah, so we don't have the power to detect those relationships. So they form these languages, and so in a way it has similarities with genetics, because when we study populations, we can, or individuals within a population, we say, okay, all these individuals within this population share profile, or I will dig in, explain a little bit more about this. So, and when we study the genetics of human populations, we focus on individuals, or we sample individuals within what we call a population that is normally defined by their ethnolinguistic identity, so when you interview someone, you say, oh, I belong to this group, this is my identity. And we normally use these ethnolinguistic labels to define our groups. This is what I mentioned before. So when we study those individuals and we say, okay, all those individuals share a similar genetic profile or ancestry profile, that we can characterize the variation, and we say those groups look more similar between them than with individuals from other group. So, and let's say we are interested in languages in one area, and we go and sample those individuals, and then some of those languages are related to each other. They have those genetic the genealogical relationship between them. When the linguists study, they say, okay, those languages are related to each other. They share a common ancestor, and then they have methods to reconstruct this proto-ancestor relating these languages. And when we study the genetics of those groups, we say, oh, but wait a minute. Those languages, these two languages, belong to the same family, but their genetic profile is different. Actually, genetically, it has an ancestry profile related to another group that doesn't belong to the family. So that represents a mismatch. And then, then that's when we need to explain why that is the case. Because if those languages share a common ancestor, you will expect that the individuals, that the speakers that speak those languages in the present are also the product of generations of transmission of the languages. But when something like that happened, this mismatch, they speak languages similar, but their genetic profiles are different, then something happened.
Yeah, and what happened? Yeah, indeed. I think it's, of course, kind of related to the point that, kind of any human can learn any human language, of course, right? So, you raise a baby, from, I don't know, Brazil in Japan, they learn Japanese, not Portuguese, unless their parents also spoke it. Let's say you had adopted them out, as it were, in this thought experiment, right? And, so in that sense, the languages are not genetic, but they behave like that in the same way of descent, right? So you basically get these kind of parallel, one genetic profile and this linguistic profile, and then exactly when they don't match up, you have to indeed, like you said, explain what. So who learned whose language, or who moved around where, all of this kind of stuff, to put it briefly.
Exactly.
Fascinating. Yeah, I find that a super interesting topic myself. I've read about a few cases before I started doing some work with all of you. I read about a few cases, and I always found it super fascinating. Well, we've been talking for quite some time now, so I think it's about time to wrap up. So before we wish everyone farewell, do you have maybe some recommendations or words of wisdom for sort of the upcoming generation, of people in your field, etc.? So maybe all those sitting at home thinking, gosh, I'd love to study genetics and then the human past, what words of wisdom would you share with them?
Well, yeah. So first, this field, let's say the study of the human past is a multidisciplinary field, or you need to read a lot from different disciplines, and so yeah, so that's something. If you're interested in the human past, you should be aware that you need to look at the different kinds of disciplines that are interested, and what is the evidence that all these disciplines have provided to address a particular. So because of these huge amounts of data, of the genetic data, you need a lot of skills to be able to handle this data. So if you're interested in doing population genetics to address questions about the human past, like a skill that would be important to learn is some data analysis and a statistical analysis of population genetics that's been built on statistics and all the kind of the theory that was laid down in the early 20th century was just kind of using statistical models to explain patterns of inheritance. So this is a field that requires those skills, but that's not a problem, because you can learn those things on the way. But you should be prepared for facing those things, and
Certainly.
And in general, I think it requires that you have like a interest for pursuing this kind of research, and finding what are the questions that interest you the most, because that's what is beautiful about science, is that you have the freedom to pursue the questions you are interested in, and ask the questions that no one else is interested. So you ask your questions, and you pursue them, and that you can do that in academia, in science. But you should prepare for also the bad side of academia and science, and is that it's always it's a competitive field. You need always to apply for money. As I said, when Rick was proposing this he submit the proposal to many different places, and yeah, you have to keep on trying. And also, because this competition, you normally don't have permanent positions everywhere, so yeah, you have to kind of be there and keep on going, and but I hope that will change eventually, because yeah, it's just hard in academia and keep on asking their questions, have some sort of themselves and
So we've been talking for a while now, and it's been fascinating, but maybe it's time to wrap up. So if you could Yeah, just give a few words of advice, perhaps, to the upcoming generation, those sitting at home thinking, wow, this is fascinating. This is what I want to do, with my life. What would you say to them?
So yeah, so for the future, for people that are interested in this field, so what I can say is that the study of the human past is a multidisciplinary field in itself, because, as I say, learning from the past, it requires to put things together from different disciplines to kind of get a better picture of how things were in the past, or what impacted. So you should be ready to learn from different disciplines, and to talk to other disciplines, to talk to your colleagues, and be open to discuss things when, for example, your results don't match whatever the results of other disciplines have say, and yeah, try to find common ground. So yeah, it requires reading, but also the field of population genetics is it's kind of already for I think almost a decade. We're in a phase where we're sequencing vast amounts of DNA. So we have the technology that allow us to basically study complete genomes. And so these are huge amounts of data. So a skill that you will need if you want to study the genetics of human populations is be able to handle the massive amounts of data, to extract patterns that inform you about this. So, for example, having some training in data analysis and in statistics, because the whole field of population genetics is based on statistical models, and so that's not a problem, because we can all learn those things on the way. But you should be ready to endure this, and that's what is great about science, is that it gives you the opportunity to ask these questions, and to learn the skills that you need to address those questions. That's great about science and academia in general. And so you should also be prepared to face the kind of the bad side of science and academia, and is this it's a highly competitive field, and there is limited positions, and you need to always apply for money. And when I was mentioning, when the start of the project, Rick tried sending this proposal and tried to get funded his ideas in many places, and so he could have said, okay, I stop here, and and so yeah, you should be ready to fight a bit against the system, and persist in asking your questions. But I really hope that there will be a change. Sometimes people have to move across continents to be able to pursue those questions. And mobility is certainly good, but when you're at certain level in your career, and in also the age you are, you want some stability, and so yeah, so it's sometimes it's hard for people to be able to pursue those interests.
Yeah, so it's not an easy road to follow, but a path to follow, but it is a worthwhile one, and it is one that, if you have the interest and the passion, you can make work.
For sure. Yeah, it's full of excitement, and the things that you can learn are if you really are interested in some questions, and you have the resources and the infrastructure to pursue those questions, certainly will be full of excitement, and you get to know amazing people.
Yeah.
along the way.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, and you know, if you ever start a podcast, then you get to interview amazing people, as I have done today. So I think that's a great place to wrap up for today. So thank you so much for coming on and giving us a great overview of both your career as well as population genetics, especially that of South America. And happy to have you on again in future. And for now, though, thank you so much for coming on. And to all the viewers / listeners, I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like and subscribe, of course. And we'll see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thanks, Alison, for the invitation. And
my pleasure.
Yeah, I hope it was clear enough. And yeah, maybe see you in the next podcast or along the way in your career with your interest also in the human past and in general about anthropology. So this is
I'm looking forward to it. Okay. Bye everyone.
Bye bye.